Good morning, everyone. Dr. Todd over at Move Now University. And I put together a cool training to talk about this morning, which is not just about why you see someone's feet flatten and turn out maybe in their neutral posture or an overhead deep squat position, but the thought process of how to think about this, which you can apply to multiple movement patterns throughout the entire body. So good morning, everyone who is joining us. Good morning, Brandy Hunter. Brandy is our doctor support and office manager at our clinic, Gonstead Spine and Wellness, out here in Meridian, Idaho. Because I'm not just speaking from, been out of the game for a while, but I'm in the game every day. We see patients in a clinic full time, and this is the stuff that we apply with our patients. I'm going to flip this around before I start talking about this because I know it's reversed in this camera angle. But the main thing that we're going to do is we're going to go through the thought process step by step. I typed it all up in the description above, or if you're listening to this in the future in a podcast, we'll have all the details in the podcast so you can read through it. But let me flip the camera around so we can get rolling. And before we start that, just know that if you want to see how we put all this in action with the clinical stuff, but also all the procedures and the how-to and the staff education, communication, handling patient objections, insurance billing, compliance, all that stuff, it's inside of our program, Move Now University. You can check in a demo at demo.movenowu.com, and you can watch a 30-minute pre-recorded demo that tells you all about all the details. So bear with me as I flip this around here. Why does Facebook make me do this? Well, they just do. All right, so hopefully you can see me because I'm going to flip this around, and I'm not going to be able to see my own screen, but this is so I don't have to reverse this after the fact. See my water heater in the background there. Okay, cool. All right, so here we go. I'm going to go like that, and I'm going to explain this as we go. So I'm coming over on this side. Hopefully you can see me okay. Okay, so this is one of our functional faults that we look for when we're assessing someone's movement patterns, like in an overhead deep squat, for example. So this is out of our, what's called the MoveWell 3, level 3 movement assessment. After we've done our basic screening and breakouts and all the stuff that we do with our patients, which we normally do on day 2, this is where if we want to dig deeper and reverse engineer someone's movement. So again, I'm not just covering the feet flatten or turn out principle here, but it's the thought process behind it. So the first thought process when you're looking at anyone's inability to move properly, to move well, is it a joint issue? Like, meaning, is there just joint restriction? Can the joint not go through a certain range of motion? And if that's the case, great, we're chiropractors. What do we do as chiropractors? We help joints move better. We help improve joint mechanics. So do we address it as a joint? How do we know it's a joint issue and not maybe a muscle or brain issue, which I'll talk about here in a second? Joint usually has a harder end feel. Sometimes it just stops. Sometimes if you're checking like shoulder mobility, for example, and you're testing different ranges of motion, different joint play, you'll just feel like it's a rigid end feel, like a hard end feel. Muscle typically is more of like a springy or spongy end feel. And that's what would be causing this person's restriction. Now, granted, I'm talking general. Okay, there's always exceptions to all this stuff, but this is the thought process going into it. And then the third reason why someone might not be moving properly is because of a brain issue. Meaning, when you check their passive range of motion, so you get them to relax, they're not actively helping you or resisting against you. When you check them passively, you can actually get them to obtain that full range of motion, but they just can't do it actively on their own because their brain cannot comprehend how to get from point A to point B properly. That's a motor control issue. Or they have all these compensations that are happening, other parts of the body are trying to move, and they still don't obtain that proper joint motion, joint action that you're looking at here. So in the case of feet flatten or turn out, in other words, that is an inability to dorsiflex and invert the foot. Okay, so what is dorsiflexion? Dorsiflexion is when the ankle comes up this way, and inversion is what would look like, it's not the same thing as pronation and supination, but inversion, okay? And it's not the same thing as a neutral ankle position, which we'll probably talk about that in another video. But or a neutral foot position, I should say. But feet flatten or turn out, inability to dorsiflex and invert the foot, inability to pull the ankle up this way and hold it in this position, or at least go through that range of motion. So we went through thought process number one. Is it joint, muscle, or brain? Let's assume that's muscle for the sake of what we're talking about here. And let me just check to see where we're going here. Okay, good. All right, so let's just assume that it's muscle in this lesson that we're going to cover. If it's a muscle issue, the first thing that we have to look at is we have to say, okay, if the feet are flattening, okay, that means that there is a increase or an overactivity of eversion and plantar flexion. So plantar flexion is when you point the toe, right? And eversion is going to be more of when the foot turns out this way. So you look at what muscles create those joint actions. Eversion is going to be fibularis and the lateral gastroc. If the outside of the leg, I don't know if you can see me in this camera angle, but if the outside of the leg is tight and the fibularis is tight, it's going to cause the foot to have a propensity to evert. All right? Plantar flexion, you have gastroc and soleus. So the muscles on the back part of the calf, if those are overly tight, that's going to keep someone in more of a plantar flexed position, or they're going to be tight, shortened, overactive in those tissues, and it's going to be difficult to do the opposing joint action. Makes sense, right? So we have gastroc and soleus. Technically, you could differentially diagnose gastroc and soleus to figure out what tissue is more responsible, but it almost doesn't matter because the intervention of getting the gastroc and the soleus to tone down with, double lacrosse ball work and stretching and so on is going to be pretty much relatively the same, even though we're looking at one muscle that crosses the knee and one that doesn't. So you don't really need to differentially diagnose those two unless you want to nerd out on it and do it, but I wrote that in there anyway. So now those are the tight and the overactive muscles. These over here would be the underactive or inhibited musculature, which is there's decreased strength or activation in the inverters and in the dorsiflexors. Just so happens that one of these muscles, the tibialis anterior, causes inversion and dorsiflexion. So guess what? The tibialis anterior is a big culprit here. Tibialis anterior needs to be activated, needs to be strong, and needs to be able to be strong at all ranges of motion, especially the end range of motion. That's another concept, is when you're looking at muscle strength tests, make sure that you test a muscle not just at one range of joint action, but you take it through another range of joint action and test it there as well, because sometimes you'll find that the muscle is actually weaker at the joint action range of motion that you really need. So in the case here, tibialis anterior might be really weak when you are pulling the person into complete dorsiflexion. So at the very top range, it might be very weak, and that might go into your programming of how to start strengthening it and activating it, getting things to connect. All right, so tibialis anterior and tibialis posterior are both inverters. Tibialis anterior is a dorsiflexor, so tibialis anterior does inversion and dorsiflexion. It's an important muscle. Again, this whole concept, the thought process, what is tight, short, overactive, and what is underactive and maybe inhibited. You have to look at that at any joint, whether you're talking about the ankle or the shoulder or the hip or anything else. I'm using a foot ankle position here as an example. Okay. Feet turn out is the second part here. It's a second part of this pattern because you have feet flatten and feet turn out. It's oftentimes seen in a neutral posture when you look at someone standing, or when they get into an overhead deep squat position and we're doing an assessment, they start to get into the squat, and because they lack dorsiflexion, they externally rotate the feet instead sometimes to try to gain a little bit more motion. It puts them in a less stable position, and it's not the strongest position to be in. So it is a weak position that's going to break down the body. That's why we want to fix this and not have someone be doing exercises or walking or just existing going through these dysfunctional movement patterns. This ultimately is what breaks your patient down when they say, my ankle hurts, or I have shin splints, or I have a knee problem, or I have whatever. It didn't just happen overnight. It happened from faulty movement patterns, doing this repetitiously, and then, God forbid, they go in and they start working out, and they exercise and they do this now repetitiously over and over and over again, they're going to break down and they're going to say, exercise hurt me, I guess I can't exercise anymore, right? You've probably heard this story before. This is how it happens. You paint the picture for the patient, you put it together, they understand it because it's the truth, and then they're committed to getting it fixed. This is what we find so often. Okay, so the second part as far as feet turn out, which is a accompanied movement or pattern or fault that we see with feet flatten. This is covered in a different part of this whole conversation in detail when we talk about a valgus knee fault, which is actually functional fault number 4. When you have a valgus knee issue, usually you have increased tibial external rotation, so the tibia externally rotates, and you have a weakness in the opposite, which is tibial internal rotation. So I listed it out in the description here above, but I have it right here too. Increased tibial external rotation, things that are tight, overactive, shortened, TFL, vastus lateralis, iliotibial band, biceps femoris, lateral gastroc. Okay? So anyway, good so far? All right, weak, inhibited, tibial internal rotators would be like medial gastroc, tibialis posterior. And tibialis posterior, it's over here too. So anyway, there's a lot of overlap with this stuff, but let's go on to the next thought process so that we keep this short and sweet and hopefully get things moving for all of you guys and gals out there of thinking about these processes and starting to think, how do you apply this to other joint actions throughout the body besides just ankle with feet flatten and turn out. So this next thing here is, so we need to activate the tibialis anterior and tibialis posterior. Okay, so like in this thought process of it's a muscular issue, we're going to need to activate tibialis anterior and posterior. We're going to do that after we tone down the muscles that are overactive. So if you had gastroc and soleus that were an issue, you're gonna pound those into oblivion first, get those loosened up, get those tissues moving a little bit better, things gliding and sliding, whether you're going to do stretching, instrument-assisted soft tissue mobilization, things like double lacrosse ball, foam rolling, and we follow a process of doing pinpoint mobility using tools like a double lacrosse ball or a J-cane, things like instrument-assisted soft tissue mobilization. That's very targeted. Then we're going to do global mobility like maybe foam rolling. Then from there we're going to do some actual stretching, and then from there eventually what we're going to do is get into trying to take someone through a range of motion and loading those tissues to help reinforce the healthy movement patterns. That's how we're going to address gastroc and soleus briefly first in this process, but then we're going to look at the opposing joint action muscles, which in this case is tibialis anterior and posterior, and we're going to get them activated. But before we get them activated, before we start to do some specific exercises to turn those muscles on, we have to say, are there overactive synergists that are maybe trying to do the job of, in this case, ankle dorsiflexion, that are allowing the tibialis anterior and posterior to be asleep at the wheel? You have to ask yourself that question everywhere. An overactive synergist is a less effective muscle or muscle group that's trying to accomplish a joint action that allows the main muscle that should be accomplishing the joint action to be asleep at the wheel. The best analogy I've heard of this is kind of like if you had a big company that was really successful, and they had this top-level CEO that just knew how to do this job perfectly, and then you have a bunch of interns running around that are also trying to help out with the job. Well, let's say that top-level CEO is out sick. Now you have like 5 interns running around trying to do the same job as that top-level CEO, and maybe they actually get it accomplished, and maybe they do it for a month or two. I don't know. Okay. So I'm using this in the whole example of like muscle tissue. Hopefully the interns are not running the show for a month or two. But let's say that muscles are doing this, like these 5 different muscles are taking over a joint action for a month or two while the top-level CEO is out sick or asleep at the wheel. What's going to happen is they can kind of get by and they can keep the company afloat. They can keep your body moving, but they're going to get exhausted. They're going to burn out, and they're not going to be as efficient as if the top-level CEO was doing the job. The top-level CEO in this case is going to be tibialis anterior, and some tibialis posterior. But what are the overactive synergists? What interns are trying to take over and do stuff that we need to get them out of the picture so that this can actually get turned back on again and take back over? And in this case, the overactive synergists of the tibialis anterior, think of the tibialis anterior as the thing that extends your foot upwards like this. I'm only showing my hand because my foot's way down here. So as this comes up here, what other muscles are trying to accomplish ankle dorsiflexion at the same time or might take over? And it's EHL and EDL, extensor hallucis longus and extensor digitorum longus, the muscles that cause the toes and the big toe to extend. Those are the ones that want to get activated at the same time when you bring your foot into ankle dorsiflexion. So how do you get those muscles out of the game so that you can just turn on the tibialis anterior solely? And it's very simple. All you have to do, which is really nice, is you just have to take your toes and you flex them. And when you flex the toes first and then you extend the foot up like this and get into ankle dorsiflexion, the extensor hallucis longus and digitorum longus are out of the picture. They turn off. It's called reciprocal inhibition. You reciprocally inhibit those muscles, which are the overactive synergists, and you get the tibialis anterior to actually take charge. Pretty cool, right? Now, tibialis posterior, that's located on the back part of your tibia, very, very close to the tibia, deep to the gastroc and the soleus. Okay, it's like glued to the back of your tibia. Tibialis posterior, remember, is an important muscle because tibialis posterior, where is it over here, helps with inversion. Okay? And remember, we got to get inversion turned back on. So tibialis posterior is the opposite thing. It does a little bit of plantar flexion, but it doesn't do a ton of plantar flexion. It does way more inversion than plantar flexion. So it does a little bit of plantar flexion, mostly inversion, and there's a couple muscles here that need to be reciprocally inhibited as well. And it's easy to remember because it's like the opposite muscles in tibialis anterior. In anterior, we have extensor hallucis and digitorum longus, so all of the toesies and the big toe extenders. This one is all the flexors of the big toe and all the toesies, right? So you have flexor hallucis longus, flexor digitorum longus. You reciprocally inhibit by extending the toes. So now what you're going to do in the tibialis posterior exercises, and we got a couple that we talk about and we teach to our patients. One of them we call shackled monkey and one we call pushy footsie. And that's thanks to trainer Tony, who always put cool names on our exercises so people would remember them. So on this one, as you are inverting and plantar flexing the foot, you're going to first extend the toes before you even get into that position to reciprocally inhibit those tissues. So that's the whole thought process of going through this. And then once you go through this process, which initially with a patient could take 20 minutes to teach them all of this stuff, but then eventually they learn the routine, they're doing it rather quickly. It's part of their warm-up routine before they actually get into an exercise that's going to do something long-term for them. The next step from there is that after you set all this stuff, then you want to reinforce this newly found, newly activated position and motion by doing a functional movement that loads that basically loads that functional movement with some sort of resistance, whether it's done banded or with a weight. We're a big fan of using kettlebells with our patients because it's a very simple and powerful tool, a cannonball with a handle on it. They can then get inspired as they learn this stuff clinically, and they can buy a couple kettlebells at home. We teach them all the foundational fundamentals, I should say, the basics, so that they can do it safely. And in something like this, they could do a front squat. So they could do like a single arm front squat, a goblet squat. They could do lunge work with this. There's all kinds of things they could do once they activate this whole process and address all these variables, start to fix the position of this. They can then go through, reinforce it with these functional patterns. Now, side note, caveat, remember, there could be joint issues. The person could have a subluxated talus. Okay, so if they have restriction in their talus because they inversion sprained their ankle and messed that up, then all this stuff is really not going to help if they have a joint problem. And that's where, if a non-healthcare practitioner is taking someone through this and they don't realize that there is a joint issue, that's where there's a problem there and the person really doesn't get past a certain plateau. You have to address the joint issue. That's why I feel like, in my very biased opinion, we as chiropractors should be the portal handling this stuff, and then we should be working with competent exercise professionals to then carry the baton and take the person through a training regimen, because that's what's actually going to keep these patterns reinforced, is not just doing a bunch of rehab forever, but doing the rehab to get into the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is the exercise, which in this case, we're biased, but we feel very strongly in kettlebell work, or at least barbell work, but done in a very safe and sound mechanical, biomechanical fashion. So with that said, this is just actually a piece of what we do inside of our program. Move Now University is the clinical end. We also teach all the other stuff, which I talked about in the very intro, which is the patient communication, the systems, the forms, the paperwork, the compliance, the billing, day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, how we go through these systems in a chiropractic practice, patient resources. There's so much stuff to it, but this is a part that we take seriously as well, so that we can put our money where our mouth is and deliver great clinical care. So if you find this intriguing or interesting, if you haven't watched it yet, check out our demo. Go to demo.movenowyou.com and you can watch a 30-minute pre-recorded demo to see where this fits inside the program and all the other moving parts of the program. And we have a lot of doctors that are going to be implementing in the next couple of months. We're moving into a new year pretty soon, depending on when you're listening to this. If you're listening to it live right now or in the near future, New Year is upon us. If you're already in the New Year, you might want to still even redefine what you do as a clinic in your community. Stand out in your community. Do something unique and different. It's not too late. It takes 12 weeks to implement all of these processes in clinic. We have a success launch process that we built inside of our program to help hold chiropractors and their teams accountable to get the thing running. We have seminars that we teach out at our clinic out here in Meridian, Idaho. We have one coming up in February 21, 22 of 2020. So all kinds of stuff. So reach out, comment, let us know, watch the demo. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope it was helpful for you. Have a great day. Have a great weekend coming up, and we'll talk to you real soon.